So today's topic is all about the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the most significant climate bills in the history of the US. There's been a whole lot of buzz about the IRA, what it means, what we need to be paying attention to. And with that comes a whole slew of questions about rollout and applicability. So we might be asking, how are these rebates going to affect my family? How are these incentives going to fit into my picture for the next 10 years? And when should I start making these plans? So this Exploring Energy series event is a deep dive on home electrification incentives, home improvements and appliance rebates, and the qualification criteria that exists within the IRA. We're so grateful to have Cora Wyent from Rewiring America as a guest speaker. Cora has a really impressive background, and so if you want to read it, I'm going to drop her bio in the chat. And at this point, the floor is yours, Cora. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, McKenna. Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet you all. And I'm excited to be here talking about the IRA today. McKenna asked me to talk just a little bit about my background first, and then we'll get into the meat of it. So I have been at Rewiring America for about 8 months now. Rewiring America is an electrification-focused nonprofit. So we're mostly focused on electrification of buildings, so switching to efficient electric heat pumps wherever possible. But we also work a little bit on electrification of transportation and renewables as well. So we've been around for about 2 years, but we're growing really quickly. We were about 6 people at the start of this year, and we're about 50 people, which I think is now, which is really exciting because it shows how much interest there is around electrification in this country right now. And before Rewiring America, I got my PhD in physics from Caltech, and I was researching new materials for solar energy. So kind of a transition to be at Rewiring America now, but I realized during my PhD that the solar materials I was working on were maybe promising 20 or 30 years in the future. And it felt more urgent to me to work on solutions that were closer to home and closer to actually being applied in people's households. So with that, I want to start talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. But first, I'd love to hear from all of you what you already know about the IRA. So you can either hop off mute or drop something in the chat. And yeah, I'd just love to hear sort of where people are coming from and what your background is on this new climate bill.
Well, Cora, hi, I'm Susan Bilo. I'm Vice President of MREA. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking your time to spend with us today. For me, I'm hearing a lot of different things, but I'm hearing some things have some caveats that need to be understood. So I'm just here to learn and absorb everything you have to say. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. Great. I see something in the chat. Great bill, but terrible implementation through the states and could have many obstacles to implementation. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that's something my organization is focused on, is making sure that we get that state implementation right, because getting the bill passed is only a small fraction of the battle. Focused on reducing inflation through energy savings programs and medical care programs, hoping that supply chain issues will be resolved, contains carrots for industry but no sticks. Yeah, these are all really great points about the IRA. Awesome. Cool. So let's get into it with a couple of slides. All right, can you all see that? Okay, awesome. So this is broadly a presentation about what the IRA means for you, and for you means mostly for American households. So we're really focused on how this affects you in your everyday life. Not so much, I'll talk a little bit at the end about how it affects manufacturers and installers, but this is really mostly about what's in the IRA for a typical American household. So I want to start with just a brief introduction. I think I'm speaking to people who are pretty familiar with this, but my presentation today is going to be really focused on electrification in the IRA, and I want to just give a 5-minute intro to why this is important. So we already know how to produce clean electricity and how to produce it cheaply with renewables like solar and wind. So this is fantastic news. And these are technologies that have been getting cheaper and cheaper over the past decades. But there's still this huge problem with sort of solving our emissions issues, which is that 47% of our energy-related emissions still come from directly burning fossil fuels in our buildings and in our vehicles. So even if we switch to renewables today, we'd still have this chunk of direct combustion of fossil fuels to deal with, of the things that aren't already powered by electricity. So what we think is the solution here, and what my organization is really big on, is electrifying everything, because if you have clean electricity and you have electrification of all these end uses like buildings and vehicles, that's what gets you to decarbonization. And if we did that, if we were able to electrify all these end uses and switch to clean electricity, that would eliminate 80% of our energy-related emissions. And the rest is industry, which is a harder problem to solve, but this is sort of a big chunk of that puzzle. So we're really excited about the Inflation Reduction Act at my organization, and we think in a lot of ways that's going to jumpstart the electrification movement, specifically the electrification of household technologies. So this is a big table, but don't worry, we're going to go through it piece by piece. These are all the different programs within the IRA that I'm going to talk about today. So we'll kind of build up this table one row at a time, but I'm going to talk about sort of 5 different main categories of programs. And here's sort of a general description of what they do. This column here is like their technical name. So if you were searching for it in the text of the bill, what you would look for. This is the type of program. So some programs are rebates, which is where you get, a direct check from the government when you buy a piece of equipment or when you install it. And then some are tax credits, which means if you pay taxes, you'll get that money. You'll basically get a discount on your taxes in the form of a tax credit. And tax credits are different from tax deductions. A tax deduction reduces your taxable income, whereas a tax credit is a direct credit against the taxes you would have to pay. So tax credits are generally more beneficial. And then this column here is the technologies that each of these programs apply to. This is the target population. So some of these programs are targeted specifically at like low and moderate income households. And then we have the maximum amount per household, and then the total budget for the program allocated within the bill. So just to kind of orient you and see what we'll be talking about with each of these different programs. And now I'll kind of go through these one by one. So the first program in the bill that I want to talk about is basically rebates for home electrification. And the technical name for this program is HERA, the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebates. And this is one that my organization actually wrote part of and did the modeling to figure out what these dollar amounts of the rebates should be. So this is one that we're really excited about. And the idea behind this program is that it's point of sale rebates for low and moderate income households to buy new efficient electric appliances. And the way that low and moderate income is defined is that a low income household is 80% or less of the area median income, and a moderate income household is 150% or less of the area median income. So for these LMI households, you can get up to these certain per equipment caps. So you could get $8,000 for installing a heat pump, $4,000 for panel upgrades, $2,500 for rewiring or installing new electrical circuits in your home, $1,750 for a heat pump water heater, $1,600 for weatherization, and then $840 for a heat pump clothes dryer or an electric stove. And these are rebates that can cover both purchase costs of the equipment and also the installation costs. And the way that income qualifications work is that for low income households, so less than 80% of the average income in an area, 100% of costs are covered up to these caps. So if a low-income household installs an $8,000 heat pump, they get an $8,000 check. And then for moderate income households, 50% of the costs are covered, but the caps on each piece of equipment are the same. So if a moderate income household installed an $8,000 heat pump, they would get $4,000. But if they installed a $16,000 heat pump, they could get that full $8,000. And these programs also include a $500 contractor incentive, but everything else must be passed through to the consumer. So the contractors can't keep any of these amounts. And these programs are going to be administered, we think, by state energy offices and tribes. And the Department of Energy is supposed to issue guidance to state energy offices on how to implement these. And I saw we had some people from the Montana Energy Office here, so you all might know more about this than I do, and feel free to chime in too. Okay, and then just pulling up the chat here to make sure that I am watching as we go, but I'll probably try to answer most questions after. So this program has a $4.5 billion budget to be spent between 2023 and 2031. So this is the first program. This is all about rebates for low and moderate income households. So that was our first program there. And sort of here you can see the summary. But yeah, thing to remember here, it's focused on electrification, it's a rebate program, and it's for these low and moderate income households. And I see someone asking about the those 80 and 150% values for Bozeman or Montana. So I'm actually going to drop in the chat. I'll talk about this more later, but we have a calculator on our website that allows you to go in and put your zip code and basically see which of those, you can put in your income too and see which of those brackets you fall into. And we think that income is going to be defined like on the median income for the county level, but we're, again, not totally sure about that yet. Oh, and one important thing about this program that I forgot to mention is that because it's going to be administered by state energy offices and not sort of centralized through your tax rebates or through the taxes and through the IRS, this probably won't be available until the middle or the end of 2023. So it's going to take a little while for these programs to come out. All right, so the second program that I want to talk about is called Homes. And this is a similar program in that it's rebates, and the rebates are higher for low and moderate income households. But this is focused on whole home energy efficiency upgrades. So the amount of a rebate you get depends on how much efficiency gains you get in your home. So low and moderate income households can get up to $8,000 and 80% of their project costs covered, and non-LMI households can get up to $4,000 or 50% of their project costs covered. And in order to get that maximum rebate amount, that $8,000 or $4,000, you have to demonstrate that you've achieved 35% energy savings in your home by implementing certain upgrades. But then sort of the rebate steps down if you achieve less energy savings. So both this program and the last program can include both single family and multifamily homes. And that total cap is on a per unit basis. And for multifamily homes, you basically have to show that half of the people in that complex meet the same income requirements. And these programs, you can't use these programs together for the same piece of equipment. So for example, if you install a heat pump, you can't both say, hey, I saved energy and I installed a heat pump, so I get $8,000 here and $8,000 here. Those two programs can't be stacked together, but you can stack one of these programs together with the tax credits that I'll talk about later. So for The dollar amounts are generally higher for electrification for the HERA program that I talked about last. But one area where we think this program in particular could be really beneficial for electrification is if you have electric resistance heating in your household, because the previous program is only for switching from fossil fuels to electric. But if you have electric resistance and you switch to a heat pump, this energy savings number is pretty easy to achieve. So really good for whole home upgrades or for electric resistance to heat pump upgrades. All right, so that was homes. It's another rebate program. There's not sort of a cap on this one, so it's for any household, although lower and moderate income households get higher amounts. And the maximum amount per household is either $4,000 for non-LMI or $8,000 for LMI. And then the total budget of this bill is similar, $4.5 billion. And again, whereas the last one was for these specific electric technologies and for switching from fossil fuels to electric, for the energy efficiency rebates, that can be for sort of whole home improvements, including those electric technologies, but it doesn't have to be these specific technologies. Okay, awesome. So those are, I'm seeing one question in the chat. How might LMI prove that they have a 35% improvement, submit power bills? Yeah, I think that's one way you could do it. There's also a modeling component too. So you can, I think that you can show that modeled savings meet that threshold. So if there's like a energy efficiency contractor that's going to do a whole batch of homes and they have sort of modeled savings numbers for each home, I think there's a provision in this bill where you can sort of use modeled savings, but I'm going to have to fact check that one. Okay. So now we've talked about 2 rebate programs, and now I'm going to focus on 3 tax credit programs. And if I don't get to your question in the chat now, I'll try to get to it at the end. Do you know if the previous heating system must be removed if a heat pump is added? That is a really good question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. I think that that is something that hasn't been figured out yet, and that will come with DOE guidance and state energy program guidelines. But yeah, that's a great question, because in a lot of cases, it can be beneficial to keep the existing heating as backup for the couple days a year that it's too cold, to kind of avoid strain on the grid and have that backup in place. Cool. So this next program is tax credits for energy efficiency and electrification. So technically, this is called the 25C program. And this is a program that has actually existed in the past, but the amount has been increased really significantly by the IRA. So this provides a 30% tax credit for certain efficiency and electrification upgrades. And again, similar to the last programs, it's both equipment costs and installation costs. And there is an annual cap on the credit that you can get for each item. And that cap is pretty high for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. It's $2,000. And then for other technologies, it's lower. So there's $1,200 for weatherization, $600 for your electrical panel or circuits if it's in conjunction with one of these other upgrades, $150 for an energy audit, and $600 for everything else. So the total annual credit is capped at $1,200 per household. And from our best understanding, that's separate from the 2,000 heat pump and heat pump water heater cap. So you could technically weatherize and install a heat pump and get $3,200 total. And this annual credit resets every year. So for example, if you installed a heat pump this year and a heat pump water heater next year, you could get that credit again in the following year. So the new version of this with these increased credit amounts starts in 2023. So this is a credit that's actually available starting January 1st of next year. So any install after that date, you can take this tax credit. And since this is a tax credit program and not something where it's rebates and was budgeted for, really there's no limit on how many people can take this tax credit or how many tax credits in total the government can give out. They've estimated that the value is going to be 12.5 billion, but if in our organization's opinion, if we do a really good job advertising this and get a lot of people to electrify and a lot of people to realize that they have this money to use against electrification, we could really exceed that number. So this is kind of a cool program in that it's an unlimited quantity of tax credits for Americans. Awesome. So that was our first tax credit program. It's for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, weatherization panels. You can also use this program for efficient fossil fuel appliances, but the amounts are lower. And we're most excited about the high amounts for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. So it's 30% up to $2,000 for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and up to $1,200 for everything else. And again, the budget for this is unlimited. So that's these electrification or energy efficiency tax credits under 25C. And then a question in the chat, are all of these credits for primary residents only? No, so this one is pretty complicated. So some, depending on the type of equipment, some are for any residents and some are for primary residents. So heat pumps and heat pump water heaters are for any of the taxpayers' residents, but energy efficiency is just for the primary, or weatherization is just for the primary residents. And I don't know the other technologies that are included in this. I'm not sure, but yeah, for the heat pump technologies, it can be any of the taxpayers' residences. And
Cora,
another question.
You had also mentioned with homes, right, that if you can prove that at least half of the multifamily residents meet the LMI threshold, that there's opportunities for a multifamily or like an apartment building to take advantage of the homes rebates, right?
That's true for homes and for HERA, for both of these top ones. Yeah. For 25C, it's I don't think you can use that for multifamily because of that residence requirement for the taxpayer. And these tax credits are not retroactive to a previously installed heat pump. The previous version of 25C gave you 10% up to $300 for a heat pump. So if you installed a heat pump in this past year, you can get that on your tax credits next year. But you know, $300 is a lot less than $2,000, but it's still something. Yeah. All right, so on to the next tax credit program. This is one that people might be more familiar with because it's been around for a while. So this is 25D. This is the residential clean energy credit. And this is a 30% tax credit for geothermal heat pumps, solar panels, battery storage, and some other energy technologies. So this is a program that's been around for a while, specifically for solar, but it had started ramping down from 30%. And the IRA basically bumped that back up to 30% through 2031. And then they also added battery storage to this, which didn't used to be a part of this. And the battery storage doesn't have to be installed in conjunction with solar, so that can be separate. And this is, again, this is one that is actually retroactive to 2022. So if you installed solar panels in 2022, you can get this 30% tax credit rather than the lower amount that it would have been. But battery storage doesn't get added until 2023. And this and all the other tax credits I'll talk about are non-refundable, which means that you have to have some tax liability or you have to owe something in taxes to get this tax credit. So unfortunately, a lot of these tax credit programs aren't going to be super beneficial to low-income households that might not owe any taxes, but that's why there are those other rebate programs that you do get a direct rebate for. So this is non-refundable. but this tax credit can carry over from year to year. So if you get a $5,000 tax credit for installing a $15,000 solar system, but you don't owe $5,000 in taxes, you can spread that tax credit out over a period of 5 years. All right, and again, this is one with sort of an unlimited amount where it's estimated to be $22 billion through 2031, but it really depends on uptake and how many people know about this and take advantage of this. All right, so that was our fourth program and the second tax credit program, solar and storage tax credits, 25D, and that is a maximum amount of 30% per household. And again, an unlimited budget. So again, this is a program that's already existed and you might be familiar with it for solar, but storage has been added in this new version of it. All right, and then getting to the questions in the chat, when does the work contract have to be dated to qualify? I assume any date after January 1st, 2023 will qualify. That has not been super clear to us yet. I'm not sure if it's when the work was completed or when you paid the bill on the work. But I think as long as, I think the IRS will hopefully issue guidance on that soon, but definitely any work that's started after January 1st, 2023 would qualify. Then a really specific question here, would it upgrading microinverters on existing solar panels qualify? I do not know the answer to that. Yeah. All right, so last tax credit program here, 30D and 25E. These are both EV tax credit programs. And these programs have existed for EVs, but they've changed pretty significantly from this new bill. So the 30D is the clean vehicle credit that's for new electric vehicles. It's a $7,500 tax credit if certain assembly requirements are met. So the vehicle has to have its final assembly in the US, and then sort of the requirements ramp up each year for more sort of domestic production of EVs. And a couple new things about this version of the EV tax credits. One is that previously, each manufacturer had a cap on how many vehicles they could sell before the tax credits expired. So certain manufacturers like Tesla had exceeded that cap already, and that's been revoked. So now any vehicle that meets those domestic manufacturing requirements will qualify. One new benefit to this version of the tax credits in the IRA is that the credits are transferable to dealers in exchange for a point of sale rebate. So that means that unlike those other programs, you don't have to have tax liability to get this tax credit because you can transfer it to a dealer that does. So anyone will be able to get this tax credit. And there are income limits. So it's $150,000 for a single filer, $300,000 for joint filers. If you make over that amount, you don't get this tax credit. So again, this is one with an unlimited value because it just depends on how many people take advantage of these tax credits. And then 25E is sort of the analogous program, but for used electric vehicles. And that's a $4,000 tax credit. Again, income limited, but the income limits are lower for the used vehicle program. So it's $75,000 for single filers and $150,000 for joint filers. These are also transferable. So again, it can be a point of sale rebate for someone who doesn't have tax liability. So that kind of wraps up our table of all the programs in the IRA related to electrification and clean energy with the EV tax credits. So that's 25E or 30D. The target population is non-high income households. So if at the very highest income level, you won't qualify, but lower and moderate will. And then the maximum amount is $7,500 for new and $4,000 for used EVs. And again, the total budget of this program is unlimited. So let's see, we're checking the time. I am going to talk through a few other sort of workforce and manufacturing incentives in this bill, and then I'll share our calculator with everyone and answer a couple of questions. All right, so for workforce incentives, one of those is the one I already talked about, which is with those electrification rebates, the HERA program. You can get a $500 installer incentive, although all of the rebates must be passed through to the household. And the HOMES program, which was the energy efficiency rebates, also has $200 million for states to develop a workforce training program. There are also some builder incentives, which are exciting. The 45L tax credits are for new energy efficient homes. So those amounts can go up to $5,000 for a single family home, meeting the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home standard. And then it's sort of less for less stringent standards. And for multifamily, it's $1,000 per unit for meeting the Zero Energy Ready Home standard, but that amount increases to $5,000 per unit if prevailing wage requirements are met. And then there's also these 179D tax credits, which are for energy efficiency in commercial buildings. This is a program that existed in the past, but the per square foot dollar amount has increased with the Inflation Reduction Act to $5 per square foot for the maximum sort of and site energy intensity reductions. And the reason that this is lumped under the builder incentives category is that if you're a tax exempt entity like a nonprofit, you can allocate this deduction to the property designer or developer. And then finally, there are some manufacturing incentives in this bill. So the Inflation Reduction Act increases the Defense Production Act budget by $500 million to bolster domestic manufacturing of heat pumps. There's also an investment tax credit for facilities manufacturing clean energy called 48C. And then it also increased the budget of the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office. So it was an additional $3.6 billion to guarantee loans of up to $40 billion in principal amounts. So I'll stop there or pause there. And what I want to do is drop the link to the calculator in the chat again. So everyone can go to that link and put in your information or some random information of a certain sort of set of parameters that you're curious about. And then it will kind of list out your upfront discounts through those rebate programs, the tax credits available to you, and your estimated bill savings per year from electrification. So this is a really handy resource for sort of keeping track of what you're eligible for, when it's going to become available, and sort of what the dollar amounts will be. And maybe I'll take some questions now, and then I also have some sort of case studies of other families if there aren't that many questions that we can come back to. Does that sound good, McKenna?
Yes, that sounds perfect. Thanks, Cora. And then a few folks were asking like where the landing page might be to capture all this information. And I think that would be the Go Electric Guide to the IRA that Rewiring America has. So if you happen to have that handy, if that's something that you could drop in the chat while we're gathering questions. But thank you so much for giving us such a robust and helpful breakdown of all of the different rebates and credits as they apply to homeowners, because there's lots of things to consider. I'd like to elevate that Dan Lloyd from the DEQ Energy Office is on the call, and he wrote a comment just saying that we're expecting rollout as far as state managed programs to happen near the end of 2023. So while it's great to be planning and knowing what's out there, we know that we'll make sure that we're simpatico as far as making sure we're distributing accurate information from what our state is planning for as they stand up these programs. So thanks, Dan. We really appreciate that. Let's see. Let's start with, there was a question from someone saying that the car dealer they spoke with was saying that used EV credits are only available through dealer resale, and wondering if you know anything about that one, Cora.
That's a good question. I I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely for the transferring the credit to the dealer, I don't imagine that could work with just like an individual selling another individual in a used EV. That sounds right to me. I feel like I've heard that before, but I'd have to double check on that. That's a good question.
Sure. Okay, question about how these rebates apply to new construction. And I think you spoke to some of this, but do you feel like we've covered it, or is there anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, I can add some more to that. So, sorry, I'm just trying to capture the questions that I don't know how to answer, so I can follow up later. So for which of these would apply to new construction? I have a handy notes document on that I'm going to scroll through quickly. So, maybe it would be helpful for me to pull that table back up so we can talk about it specifically. Okay, give me one sec here. Okay, so for HERA, this can apply to new construction, but it wouldn't apply to like a spec home. It would have to be a home built for a certain sort of homeowner, because the homeowner has to meet these income requirements. Homes does not apply to new construction because that is based on what your previous energy use was and what the final energy use was. 25C can be applied to new construction, but again, it's sort of related to a taxpayer's residence and placed in service by the taxpayer. So this has to be for a new home built for a certain homeowner in mind. And then I think the same goes for 25D. And then the big one for new construction that applies regardless of whether it's sort of built for a homeowner or just built in general is this 45L program. So this is a tax credit specifically for developers, not for the homeowner. And that is based on whether you meet these Energy Star new construction or zero energy ready home standards.
Got it. Thank you. Question from Danielle: do we see opportunities coming down the road for commercial buildings? I can hop in and say yes, absolutely. There are some energy efficiency upgrade like tax incentives for commercial as well that come through the IRA, but we can only cover so much in each of these 1 hour Exploring Energy series. And because this one was focused primarily on homes, that's where we spent a lot of our time. But the answer is yes, absolutely. And I'll see if I can find some good follow-up stuff to get to you, Danielle. But for the sake of time, let's keep moving to a question from Gary about heat pumps. Heat pumps vary in efficiency. Are there efficiency standards for the related tax credits with heat pumps?
Yes, there are. So for so for the 25C tax credits, the heat pumps have to meet CEE Tier 3, which is the Council on Energy Efficiency, I think. And I was just looking at this the other day, but I have to look up again exactly what SEER HSPF value that is. For HERA, it's Energy Star, so it's a less stringent requirement. Yeah, I won't throw numbers out there without double checking them. So let me pull up the CE actually just changed their requirements. It used to be really stringent, and we were worried that no heat pumps were going to qualify for these 25C tax credits, but they just lowered that Tier 3 so that more heat pumps will qualify. So maybe while McKenna's getting the next question queued up, I can try to pull up that document that has that information.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Cora. Question from Chris in Stevensville asking about if system upgrades would be covered by these incentives. I think that's similar to what Diana asked about microinverters, if she was to replace microinverters. And it seems to me that maybe that answer isn't totally clear yet, but it's a good one to keep in mind. So thanks, Chris. Then there's a question here from Noel. Will there be information sessions on how the IRA applies to municipalities? Nothing in the books as far as MREA yet, but I really appreciate that feedback. And if there is desire to have some good convening spaces for municipalities, we can potentially coordinate for future Exploring Energy series in 2023. Let's see, I think that concludes everything that I saw in the main chat. and then yes, and +1 from Catherine. So thank you. Now let's go ahead and just open the floor if anyone has specific questions, and if you'd like to unmute yourself and get those questions to Cora. We've got 15 more minutes if you'd like. The floor is yours.
Awesome. And then just to follow up on that CEE question, it depends on the region in the US, but for ducted heat pumps, it's a SEER2 value of 17 and an HSPF value of 8.1 to qualify for the tax credits. And I can share the document for that with McKenna too.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Thanks, Cora. And thanks for getting those numbers for us. I hope that answers your question, Gary. All right. Looking like another question in the chat here from David. How much might main standards change in negotiations with European manufacturers? Ooh, that sounds tricky.
I don't know the answer to that one.
That might be a wait and see.
Yep. Okay.
This is a question about incentives and timing of rollover between the 2022 incentives with 25C, if I'm remembering correctly. So if a household installed solar and batteries in fall of 2022, their incentives or their tax credit would only apply to the panels and not the batteries if they were to be claimed retroactively. That's my understanding. Does that jive with yours, Cora?
Yeah, that's I just had someone from our policy team confirm that last night, and that's what they said too. So to our best knowledge, the panels do qualify in 2022 and batteries start in 2023.
Got it. Great. Hope that answers your question there. Any other questions either in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions directly.
If not, I can also.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how some of this might apply to somebody building a cabin. If you don't have a construction company built in that can say, well, this is gold energy standard if you're basically doing it yourself.
Oh, that's a great question. So for the tax credits, that 25C program, that applies to any residence. So you could definitely get the $2,000 tax credit for a heat pump or a heat pump water heater for that purpose. I don't have great information on how sort of a specific individual would qualify for this zero energy ready homes or the Energy Star new construction standards. You could go to the Department of Energy or the Energy Star websites on those though.
This is Susan. I was wondering, Dan, you offered to answer questions, but I like the idea that could be a future MREA webinar where you give us the specifics on how the rebates apply to those of us here in Montana. If is maybe thumbs up from folks or something if there's interest in that type of a future webinar.
Yeah, Susan, this is Dan. I'm just going to assume everybody wants that. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of questions to be answered. We have started engaging with DOE primarily through our kind of national trade organization, the National Association of State Energy Officials. There's actually a webinar tomorrow. I will drop a link in the chat here for folks that want to engage, but Cora did a great job, answering a lot of detailed questions. There are obviously some pieces that we know, but there is a lot that is still yet to be determined. So as that picture comes into focus, we will be standing up a public website with information and again, happy to answer questions as best as we can at this moment. But I think it's going to be months out until the picture is really more clearly into focus.
Yeah, I meant later once you know the specifics. That'd be a great webinar.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to EQ for allowing us to put you on the spot and soft commit to a fun IRA rollout webinar with MREA. That'd be great. Okay, well, with 10 minutes left, I'm just going to try and think about what's these final questions might be good to lift up for the final minutes of our presentation. Let's see. Okay, so there's a few kind of anecdotal experiences here saying that clients have been able to take advantage of solar plus storage system cost tax credits this year. So that's just a good note that we're hearing from a couple people.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely try or see what that form looks like when you have to fill it out for the IRS and everything.
Sure. So maybe for our final moments here, Cora, there's a question here about Rewiring America's vision for electrifying everything. And maybe that would be a good way to close us out. If you'd like to end with speaking to that, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a big question. We're mostly electrifying everything can mean, cars, industry, buildings. We're mostly focused on people's households. So both multifamily apartments or single family homes. And we are growing really quickly as an organization because we want to give sort of every household in the US all the tools that they need to be able to electrify their home. So those tools could look like, one thing that I'm working on right now is building out a personal electrification planner on our website, which would sort of be an expanded version of that calculator that we showed you, where you could put in some information about your house, and we could show you, okay, if you switch from natural gas to electricity, here's how your electricity bills might change, and here's what the upfront cost would be. And based on the age of your appliances, you should do this first, this second, this third, etc. So that's one thing that we're working on. Another thing that we've been working on recently is trying to figure out which communities across the US are most promising to start electrifying, because we know that it's harder to electrify one home here, one home here, one home here for a lot of reasons. But if you can concentrate electrification in one neighborhood, there are a lot of benefits that come to that, from like partnering with a specific contractor and being able to take a whole branch of the natural gas grid offline, rather than sort of taking one person off from different areas at the time, which kind of distributes the cost of maintaining the natural gas grid over fewer customers. So one thing that we've been working on is identifying which communities or cities or towns across the country are especially promising for electrification. So those might be places with really high natural gas prices, like Chicago, for example, has a really high fixed cost of natural gas on their bills. It could be places with sort of really high energy burden that could benefit from electrification, or a lot of like fuel oil and propane, which generally yields to big savings from electrification. So we've got a lot of different plans and approaches, but the idea is kind of how can we drive down the cost of electrification for every household, because most people won't do it if you have to pay this huge amount upfront that then doesn't pay back over time. But if we can drive down the upfront cost or finance it so that you can kind of pay it back with your utility bill savings, that could be really beneficial. So I'm looking at microgrids and or strategizing, pressurizing power companies on net metering. Not so much so far. We've been mostly focused on like, how do you switch out household technologies? Like, how do you switch furnaces to heat pumps and gas stoves to induction stoves? So we've been more focused at the household level, but we're definitely interested in doing more with utilities too. Hopefully that answered that question.
I think it did, yeah. And I mean, Rewiring America is just such a stellar organization. So if you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend looking at their website and all the resources that they put together. It's just a really strong organization. And at least in the circles that I run in, when we're talking about IRA resources, lots of people mention that Rewiring America is really the go-to place. So again, we're so thankful for your time, Cora. And we're really glad that we were able to walk through this super informative webinar with you. So thank you everybody so much for joining. Last announcement for housekeeping. Like I said, this is our final Exploring Energy Series event for 2022. And if you want to join us next year, we'll have a legislative briefing during the first week of the Montana legislature. There's a new registration for that. So this is a whole new event, I guess you could say. But if you'd like to join MREA, our next upcoming gathering or community event would be at the trailhead of the Montana legislature, where we'll talk about Montana Renewable Energies Association's priorities at the state level. I mean, Craig mentioned net metering, and of course, that's always a high priority for MREA. And we'll also discuss why the legislative session and state lawmakers are important and really critical to the renewable energy transition. And we'll also be providing tools and guidance for how to engage in the legislative session. So mark your calendars down for that. And we'll meet you at the trailhead on the first week of the state legislature. So thank you everybody so much for joining. And at this point, we will bid you all adieu. Have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Thanks all.